They told me it was just a quick stop. 20 minutes, Mom! Grab a coffee, stretch your legs, David had said, flashing that boyish smile that used to melt my heart when he was 5. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. I stood outside the Rusty Spoon, a faded diner off the interstate, clutching a paper bag with 2 blueberry scones and a styrofoam cup of tea that was rapidly losing its heat. I watched the highway. Cars blurred past, red, silver, black, a river of metal rushing toward lives that had nothing to do with mine. David had parked the SUV near the pump. Chloe, my daughter-in-law, had stayed in the passenger seat, scrolling on her phone. She didn't look up when I got out. She rarely looked at me these days. I remember checking my watch, a silver analog piece Robert gave me 30 years ago. It was 11:15 a.m. The sun was high and bright, casting sharp shadows against the cracked pavement. I sat on the wooden bench, painted a peeling red. I ate one of the scones slowly, saving the other for David. He always liked sweets when he was driving. I waited. By 11:45, the coffee was cold. By 12:30, the lunch rush started at the diner. Truckers and families spilled out of minivans, arguing about legroom and French fries. By 2 p.m., a hollow feeling began to expand in my stomach. It wasn't hunger. It was a cold, creeping realization that I tried to push down. I told myself there was traffic, maybe a flat tire. Maybe they went to the outlet mall down the road and lost track of time. But my phone, the new smartphone David insisted I get because it's easier for us to track you, Mom, was silent. No messages, no missed calls, just the background image of my granddaughter Sophie smiling at her graduation. I walked inside the diner and asked the waitress if she had seen a black SUV. She looked at me with tired eyes, wiping a rag across the counter. "Honey, I see 100 SUVs an hour. You waiting on a ride?" "My son," I said, my voice sounding thinner than usual. "He'll be right back." I went back to the bench. The sun began to dip. The air turned crisp, biting through my thin cardigan. I sat there until the neon sign above the diner buzzed to life, casting a sickly yellow glow on the pavement. That's when the silence truly hit me. It wasn't the silence of a quiet room. It was the silence of a life that had been severed. We had planned this trip for months, a scenic drive up to the lake house. It was supposed to be a fresh start, according to Chloe. "We just want to spend quality time with you, Elena," she had said, her voice sugary sweet. "David worries you're too isolated in that big house all alone." I had packed sandwiches. I had brought the old road maps David used to love reading when he was a boy, tracing the red lines with his sticky fingers. I thought I was a passenger on a family vacation. I didn't realize I was cargo being jettisoned. When the sun fully set, I knew they weren't coming back. The realization didn't come with a scream. It came with a heavy, crushing weight in my knees. I stood up, leaving the bag with the cold scone on the bench. It felt like leaving a piece of my dignity behind. I walked to the gas station attendant, a young man with grease under his fingernails. "I need to use a phone," I said. "My battery is dead." It wasn't, but I couldn't bear to look at the blank screen anymore. I dialed David's number. Straight to voicemail. I dialed the house line. Nothing. I dialed Chloe. It rang once, then clicked. Rejected. The attendant looked at me with pity. That was the hardest part, the pity of a stranger. "You got anyone else to call, ma'am?" I called a taxi service, realizing with a jolt of panic that my purse was in the back seat of David's car. All I had was the $20 bill I'd tucked into my pocket for the coffee and my ID in my cardigan pocket. I managed to catch a Greyhound bus that stopped 3 miles down the road. The walk there was brutal. Trucks roared past, shaking the ground beneath my sensible walking shoes. I felt small. I felt invisible. The bus ride back was a blur of darkness and rhythmic tumpung. I sat near the back, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. I closed my eyes and saw David at age 7, feverish with the chicken pox, clinging to my hand. "Don't leave, Mommy. Stay right here." I had stayed. I stayed through the fevers, the heartbreaks, the college tuition payments, the wedding planning. I stayed when Robert died and the house felt like a tomb. I had always stayed. Why hadn't he? It was past 1 a.m. when the bus dropped me off in our town square. The streets were empty. The wind howled through the alleyways, carrying dead leaves that skittered across the sidewalk like dry bones. I had to walk another 2 miles to my street. My legs burned. My back ached in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with betrayal. I finally turned onto Elm Street. The house, my house, the one Robert and I bought 40 years ago, stood dark and silent. The oak tree in the front yard cast long skeletal shadows against the siding. I limped up the porch steps, reaching for the spare key we always kept hidden inside the decorative ceramic turtle by the door. The turtle was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs. I moved to the door and punched my code into the electronic keypad David had installed last month. Error. Red light. I tried again. Error. I tried the handle. Locked tight. I stepped back and looked at the windows. The blinds were drawn tight, tighter than I ever left them. The porch light, usually on a motion sensor, didn't flicker. It had been disabled. I sat down on the porch swing, the one Robert had built with his own hands. The chains creaked, a lonely sound in the night. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering violently now. I wasn't just locked out of my house. I was locked out of my life. I took my phone out one last time, 2% battery. I sent a text to David. "I'm home. Let me in." I watched the screen. The bubbles didn't appear. The message status changed to delivered. Then, a minute later, red. And then, nothing. The screen went black. My phone died. I sat there in the dark, on the porch of the home where I had raised a son, realizing that the cold biting into my skin was the warmest thing I would feel that night. I didn't cry. I was too shocked to cry. I just stared at the door, wondering when exactly my son had stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as an obstacle. I don't know how long I sat there. Time becomes strange when you're waiting for a door to open that never will. I must have drifted off because the next thing I heard wasn't a car engine, but the sharp creak of a screen door opening next door. A beam of light cut across my front lawn. "Elena?" It was Martha Higgins. She's lived in the yellow bungalow next to us for 20 years. We weren't best friends. We were mailbox friends. We exchanged Christmas cards and polite nods while weeding the flower beds. But that night, she was a guardian angel in a floral bathrobe. She didn't ask stupid questions. She didn't ask why I was shivering on my own porch swing at 2 a.m. She just saw the suitcase missing, saw the dark house, and saw the slump of my shoulders. "Come inside," she said, her voice firm. "I've got the kettle on." I followed her. Her house smelled of lavender and old paper. She wrapped a knitted afghan around me and poured me a mug of peppermint tea. My hands were shaking so badly I had to use both of them to lift the cup. "I called David," I whispered, the steam hitting my face. "He didn't answer." Martha looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "I know, honey. I saw them leave earlier. They packed the car like they were going on a long trip. I thought you were with them." "I was supposed to be," I said. The realization settled in my chest like lead. I was supposed to be. I stayed on Martha's sofa that night. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of her grandfather clock.
Every tick felt like a countdown I hadn't known was happening. I replayed the last few months in my head. David offering to handle the bills so I wouldn't have to worry. Chloe suggesting I sign a power of attorney just in case of emergencies. The way they whispered in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep, I had thought it was love. I had thought they were caring for an aging mother. Now I saw it for what it was, a slow, methodical erasure. The next morning, the blow came not from a lawyer, but from a child. Martha let me use her iPad. My phone was dead and I needed to see if anyone had reached out. There was an incoming FaceTime request from Sophie, my granddaughter, my sweet Sophie, only 16. I answered. Her face filled the screen, pixelated and tear-stained. She was in her bedroom, the one with the posters I had helped her pick out. "Grandma," she choked out, Mom said you had an episode." "An episode?" I asked, my voice steadying. "What kind of episode, Sophie?" "She said you got confused at the rest stop, that you wandered off and they couldn't find you. She said the doctors think it's dementia. They said it's not safe for you to be alone anymore." The lie was so bold, so calculated, it took my breath away. They weren't just stealing my home, they were stealing my sanity. They were rewriting my history to justify their greed. "Sophie, look at me," I said, leaning into the screen. "I am sitting in Mrs. Higgins' kitchen. I am drinking tea. I am perfectly fine. Your parents left me there. They drove away." Sophie wiped her eyes, looking confused. "But Dad is filing papers, Grandma. I heard him on the phone. He's petitioning for guardianship. He says you're incapacitated." The word hung in the air. Incapacitated. A legal term for useless. A legal term that strips you of your rights, your voice, and your dignity. After we hung up, I felt a fire ignite in my belly. It wasn't the hot, flashy anger of youth. It was the cold, hard fury of a survivor. I had nursed David through pneumonia. I had paid for his first car. I had welcomed Chloe into our family when her own parents wouldn't speak to her. And this was my repayment? I thanked Martha and walked back over to my house. I didn't try the door this time. I walked around to the back of the garage, to the small potting shed where Robert used to keep his gardening tools. David never went in there. He hated yard work. I reached under the loose brick near the foundation, a hiding spot Robert and I had used for spare keys since the 80s. It was still there. I unlocked the shed and stepped into the dusty, earth-smelling silence. In the corner, behind a stack of clay pots, was an old, dented filing cabinet. David had cleaned out the home office months ago, claiming he was digitizing everything. But he didn't know about this cabinet. This is where Robert kept the things that mattered. I pulled open the bottom drawer. It groaned in protest. There, sandwiched between appliance manuals and old tax returns, was a thick manila envelope. The last will and testament of Robert J. Sterling. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling. I remembered the day Robert signed it. He had just had his second heart attack. He was scared. He told me, "Elena, people change when money is involved, even family. I want to make sure you're protected, no matter what." I brushed him off back then, telling him he was being paranoid. He wasn't paranoid. He was prophetic. I opened the document. I scanned the pages until I found the clause he insisted on, the bad actor clause. It was standard legal jargon, but the meaning was clear. If any beneficiary attempts to coerce, manipulate, or declare the primary beneficiary incompetent for personal gain, they are immediately disinherited. I held the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. "Thank you, Robert," I whispered. An hour later, I was sitting in the office of Mr. Henderson, the attorney who had drafted the will all those years ago. He was older now, his hair white, but his eyes were sharp as tacks. He listened to my story without interrupting. When I told him about the rest stop, his jaw tightened. When I told him about the guardianship petition, he leaned forward. "They moved fast," Henderson said, looking at the court filings he had pulled up on his computer. "David filed an emergency motion this morning. He claims you're a danger to yourself. He's asking for full control of the estate and the house." "He wants to sell it," I said. "Chloe has been talking about a condo in Florida for months." Henderson nodded. "If this guardianship goes through, Alina, you lose everything. You become a child in the eyes of the law." "Then let's make sure it doesn't go through," I said. He smiled, a dry, thin smile. "We can do better than that. We can implement the protection trust. It's a strategy we discussed years ago, but never finalized. We move your assets, the house, the savings, the stocks, into an irrevocable trust. You are the beneficiary. I am the trustee. David gets nothing." "Do it," I said. "It will start a war," Henderson warned. "They will come for you." I looked out the window at the busy street below. I thought of the cold bench at the diner. I thought of Sophie's tears. "They already started the war, Mr. Henderson," I said softly. "I'm just finishing it." I spent the next 3 days moving in silence. I stayed at Martha's, sneaking into my own house through the back shed key only when I knew David and Chloe were at work. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I packed. I took the photo albums. I took the jewelry Robert gave me. I took the small things, the ceramic turtle, the quilt my mother made, the letters Robert wrote me during the war. I moved everything into a storage unit Henderson arranged. I left the furniture. I left the big TV. I left the expensive kitchen gadgets Chloe had bought to replace my old reliable ones. I left the house feeling hollow. It looked like a home, but the soul was gone. Then, the invitation arrived. It was in my mailbox. Martha brought it to me. Heavy cream cardstock with gold lettering. A celebration of life transition. Join us for a dinner to honor Elena Sterling as she moves into the next phase of her care. It was a retirement party. For me. But I wasn't retiring. I was being put out to pasture. They invited the neighbors. They invited the church group. They invited David's boss. They wanted a public audience to witness how caring and responsible they were being. They wanted witnesses to my decline. I held the card in my hand. "Are you going?" Martha asked, looking worried. "Oh, yes," I said, staring at the date.
I prepared for the dinner like a soldier prepares for a court-martial. I didn't wear the beige, shapeless dress Chloe had bought me for Christmas. Instead, I reached into the back of my closet, the part I hadn't emptied yet, and pulled out my navy blue silk suit. It was tailored, sharp, and commanded respect. I put on the pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 30th anniversary. They felt cool and heavy against my skin, a physical reminder that I was loved, that I had been someone's partner, not just a burden to be managed. I walked the 3 blocks from Martha's house to my own front door. The driveway was full. Luxury cars I didn't recognize, a catering van. I rang the doorbell. My own doorbell. Chloe answered. She looked flushed, holding a glass of champagne. For a split second, her eyes widened in shock, perhaps surprised that I looked so composed, so lucid. "Elena, you made it," she chirped, leaning in for a kiss she didn't mean. "We were worried you might forget the time." "I have an excellent memory, Chloe," I said, stepping past her. "Better than you think." The house had been transformed. My cozy living room, usually filled with books and soft throws, was now a staging area. High-top tables, rented glassware, waiters weaving through the crowd with trays of canapés. The guests were a mix of people I knew and people I didn't. There was Reverend Miller from the church. There were neighbors who had watched me water my roses for 20 years. And then there were David's colleagues, men in expensive suits, who looked at me with that distinct mix of pity and dismissal reserved for the elderly. I spotted David across the room. He came over, placing a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, controlling. "Mom, you look nice. I'm glad you're calm today." "Why wouldn't I be calm, David?" I asked, meeting his eyes. He blinked and looked away first. Dinner was served in the dining room. They had set the table for 12. David sat at the head, Robert's seat. Chloe sat opposite him. They placed me in the middle on the side, like a child invited to the adults' table. The conversation flowed around me, not to me. They talked about real estate, about the market, about the challenges of elder care. Chloe sighed loudly, recounting how difficult the last few months had been. "It's a labor of love," she said, looking mournfully at the guests. "But we have to be realistic. Elena needs professional help. The facility we found in Florida is top tier." A facility in Florida. They weren't just moving me, they were exiling me. Reverend Miller nodded sympathetically. "It's a brave decision, David, honoring your mother by ensuring her safety." I took a sip of water. The glass was cold. My hands were steady. Then came the toasts. David stood up, tapping his spoon against his wineglass. The room quieted. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he began, his voice thick with practiced emotion. "This has been a hard year for the Sterling family. Watching my mother decline has been heartbreaking." He looked at me, a sad smile plastered on his face. "But we are here to celebrate her legacy. As we transition control of the estate to ensure her care, I promise to steward this home and this family with the same love she once had." "To Elena," someone called out. "To Elena," the room echoed. They raised their glasses. I didn't. I waited until the clinking stopped. I waited until the silence stretched just a little too long, making people shift in their seats. Then I stood up. David's smile faltered. "Mom, you don't have to speak. It's okay." "Oh, I think I do," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a knife. I reached into my purse. I didn't pull out a tissue or a reading glass case. I pulled out the folded document Mr. Henderson and I had finalized that morning. "Thank you for the lovely dinner, David, Chloe. The roast was delicious, even if it was a bit dry." A few nervous chuckles from the guests. "I've been listening to you talk about my decline all evening, about how confused I am, about how I need to be managed." I unfolded the paper. The sound was crisp in the silent room. "I may be old, David, but I am not confused. I remember the diner you left me at. I remember the locks you changed, and I certainly remember the petition you filed to declare me mentally incompetent." The room gasped. A collective intake of breath. Reverend Miller looked from me to David, his brow furrowing. "Stop, Mom," David hissed, his face turning a blotchy red. "You're having an episode. Let's go to the other room." "Sit down, David," I said. It was the voice I used when he was 10 and had broken a window. It worked. He froze. "This," I said, holding up the paper,
is an amendment to your father's original will, the one you tried to hide, the one you thought I'd never find in the potting shed. I put on my reading glasses slowly. I wanted them to wait. It's a standard clause, really. It states that any beneficiary who attempts to use manipulation, isolation, or coercion to gain control of the estate shall be, I looked up over my glasses, disinherited immediately. Chloe dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. Furthermore, I read, I have officially transferred all assets, including this house and the savings account, into the Sterling Protection Trust. I am the sole beneficiary. Mr. Henderson is the trustee, and upon my death, the assets will be liquidated and donated to the St. Jude's Children's Hospital. I looked at David. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. So there is no estate for you to manage, David. There is no house to sell, Chloe. The locks will be changed back tomorrow morning, and I expect you both to be moved out by noon. I folded the paper and placed it back in my purse. I believe I'll skip dessert. I'm quite full. I pushed my chair back from the table and walked away from it. The silence was absolute. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the click of my heels on the hardwood floor, the floor I owned, the floor I had just reclaimed. I walked back to Martha's house, and for the first time in weeks, my shoulders felt light. The heavy weight of fear was gone, replaced by the calm, steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. But the war wasn't quite over. They wouldn't give up that easily. I knew David. He was desperate. And desperate men do dangerous things.
The morning after the dinner, the phone didn't stop ringing. David called 6 times. Chloe called twice. I didn't answer. I didn't need to hear their panic. I had seen enough of their greed. I spent the morning with the locksmith. He was a kind man with heavy boots who whistled while he worked. When the final bolt clicked into place on the front door, a new, heavy-duty deadbolt, it sounded like a gavel coming down. Case closed. At noon, David's car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the living room window, standing behind the sheer curtains. He walked up to the door, reached for his keys, and froze when they didn't fit. He knocked. Then he pounded. "Mom, open the door. We need to talk about this." I opened the door, but I kept the chain on. Through the 2-inch gap, I saw my son. He looked tired. He looked smaller than I remembered. "There's nothing to talk about, David," I said calmly. "You can't do this," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "The house, the plans. We already put a deposit down on the condo in Florida. We'll lose the money." That sounds like a you problem, not an us problem. I slipped a final envelope through the crack in the door. It wasn't money. It was a copy of the deed transfer to the trust, stamped and notarized. "Goodbye, David. Please don't come back until you remember how to be a son rather than an estate manager." I closed the door, I locked it, and then I wept. Not for the house, but for the boy he used to be. The boy who used to bring me dandelions. I cried for the loss of what could have been, but I didn't regret what I had done. 2 days later, Sophie came. She didn't knock. She just sat on the porch swing, knees pulled up to her chest, wearing her green hoodie. I went out and sat beside her. "Is it true?" she asked, not looking at me. "Did they really leave you at the diner?" "Yes," I said. "It's true." She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "I hate them." "No," I said, smoothing her hair. "Don't hate them. Hate is too heavy to carry, Sophie.
Just see them. See them clearly. That's enough. I went inside and brought out the blue velvet photo album, the one I had rescued from the closet. It had pictures of David's childhood, but also pictures of me before I was a mother, me traveling in Europe, me graduating college, me dancing with Robert. Keep this, I told her. So you remember that I had a life before I was grandma, and so you remember that you have a life that belongs only to you. She hugged me then, a fierce, tight hug that told me I hadn't lost everyone. The move happened a week later. I didn't stay in the big house. It was too full of ghosts. I rented it out to a nice young family with a golden retriever. The rent money went directly into the trust. I moved 3 hours south to a small coastal town called, violently, Windy Point. It's not fancy. My new place is a single-story cottage with white siding and wind chimes that sing whenever the ocean breeze picks up. The furniture is mismatched, the floorboards creak, but every inch of it is mine. Yesterday was my birthday. I woke up to the sound of seagulls and waves crashing against the rocks. I made coffee in my old French press. I opened the window and let the salt air fill the kitchen. There were no parties, no fake toasts, no forced smiles. Just me, a book, and a slice of lemon cake Mrs. Higgins had mailed me from back home. Sophie called. We talked for an hour about her college applications. She's going to study journalism. She wants to tell the truth. I like to think she got that from me. In the afternoon, I sat at my small desk by the window and pulled out a stack of papers. I've started writing. It's not a memoir exactly. It's a record. I titled the first chapter, I Am Not Invisible. I sent a copy of the manuscript to the local library's archive project, a collection for unheard voices. The librarian, a soft-spoken woman named Clara, called me last week. She said my story was important. She said it might help other women who feel like they are disappearing in their own homes. Life is smaller now, quieter, but it is real. I walk the beach every evening at sunset. I watch the tide come in and go out relentless and steady. It reminds me that things change, that the water can wash away the footprints of the past, leaving the sand smooth and new. I was left behind. I was discarded like an old wrapper, but I didn't fade away. I stood up. I walked home. I claimed my voice. If you are listening to this and you feel like you are sitting on that cold bench, waiting for a ride that isn't coming, stand up. Check your pockets. You might find a key you forgot you had. You are not done. You are not a burden, and you are certainly not invisible. The engine may have stopped, but your journey isn't over. Start walking.